Utah just wrapped up their first ever Big 12 Media Day, and Kyle Whittingham opened up a little bit about his future. We got to discuss those juicy comments and recap Utah's first appearance at Big 12 Media Day on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcasts. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media. We can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X today. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more by using FanDuel. As the playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about Big 12 Media Day. We got to hear from Kyle Whittingham, Cam Rising. The other players got opportunities to speak, but we're going to mainly be focusing on Kyle Whittingham and Cam Rising. And particularly, we got to lead the show with the big revelation that just a big statement that Kyle Whittingham kind of made at the very end. And it wasn't one he intended to make he did not want this to be the headline exiting Big 12 Media Day, but it's going to be the headline ending Big 12 Media Day from a Utah perspective was the quote he gave on his future. And what's funny about it is we expected Kyle Whittingham to keep things close to the vest, but I did say going into this, the biggest thing I wanted to hear from Kyle Whittingham after it was announced that Morgan Scalley had been named the head coach in waiting all the way back in November, but we didn't get to hear about it. It wasn't publicly announced until just last week. We wanted to hear what Kyle Whittingham would say about his future. And he was directly asked about his future and said he's really excited about this season and taking it day by day. But then his very last question, funnily enough, of his big press conference for Big 12 Media Day, his press conference, and also did hit on ESPN Plus with the Big 12 crew that ESPN had that was covering there. But his final question of the press conference was, he was asked just his thoughts on Vegas and how good it's been to Utah. And of course, he talked about winning those Pac-12 championships there and said it's a great host and talked about a lot of things. And he also decided to bring up how Utah will be there in 2027, which was just brought to light yesterday, that Utah is going to be taking on Miami Labor Day weekend, a big kickoff event to the college football season. That won't be till Labor Day 2027. And Kyle Whittingham did straight out come out and say that he probably won't be sitting in this chair for that game. And by this chair, he meant as the head coach of Utah football, taking questions ahead of their game in 2027. So Kyle Whittingham said, I probably won't be coaching in 2027. And when we take that statement into consideration and a few other things into consideration that Kyle Whittingham has said in the past, which I'm about to dive into, I personally believe that this is going to be Kyle Whittingham's last season coaching this Utah football program. We've talked about this a little bit on the show, but I really want to dive into why in some ways this just feels like another piece. This, I'm not going to be here in 2027. His contract is last year, currently he's on, ends in, like, he goes through the 27 season. But he said he's probably not going to be here that long, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's followed along with some of those comments that he's not going to get to 27. But I do think there's more and more reason to believe that this is going to be his last season at the helm for Utah football. So let's talk about a couple of the reasons why I do think this will be his final season leading this Utah football program. Number one, he has said in the past that he didn't want to coach past 65, or was considering hanging it up, but more than likely was going to stop after he turns, not coach past 65. He will turn 65 in November. So that's just a few months away, obviously. This makes sense if we're going based on what he recently said of not wanting to coach past 65. There makes a lot of sense there that he will honor his word, honor what he said there, and this would be his very last season. He's also, when you just look in general at this Utah football roster, right, it's kind of a natural exit point after this season. There's going to be 10 to probably even closer to 15 plus players that exit this Utah team that were major impact guys. I think everyone, barring COVID eligibility, something I'm not aware of, will, after this year, the players who were part of that first Pac-12 championship team, the 2021 team, and most of them part of the 22 one as well, I believe will go off to the NFL or graduate. So you're losing your large core and your best players, including Cam Rising, Brant Keithy, Junior Tafuna is another guy, a leader for this Utah defense. We've talked about Lander Barton, Karene Reed. Zamiah Vaughn, the players that have defined this era of Utah football success, they'll all be exiting. So it's going to be next year, you look at as a rebuilding or a retooling year for this Utah football program. Does Kyle Whittingham want to be a part of that? I have real questions about that. I mean, he's made the comments as my coach past 65. He also, after this year, will have helped Utah navigate another conference transition. You know, he's been at Utah this will be his 20th year coaching, but he's been at Utah for so long. He's been a part of 4 transitions from conferences. That's a lot, going from the Mountain West, the Big 12, the Pac-12. Like, he has made a lot of these transitions, or even going back to the WAC, of course. Like, there's just a lot of transitions added up, and it's hard to run a college football program. 20 years is a very long time doing so, right? That's why we see so many other coaches get burned out by the process and the grind, because it is a rigorous one, and it's one that requires, it's a nonstop grind, just so much energy and effort that you expand. And especially if you're Kyle Whittingham and the world around you is changing, do you want to continue to be a part of this changing world of college football, in a world also where you're like next year, you were losing a lot of the guys that have helped you be so successful. So there's just going to be a lot of changes and a lot of new. Do you want to be a part of that learning process with those guys? And of course, Utah can transfer in and bring in win now guys, but that isn't always a surefire thing. We saw Jake Bentley didn't exactly go to plan. We saw, of course, I can't believe I just blanked on his name, but the former Baylor quarterback who came up to Utah that I can't believe I just blanked on his name. That's going to drive me nuts. But Charlie Brewer, thank you to myself. I finally came to me. So Charlie Brewer coming through. That hasn't always worked for Utah, bringing in the transfer guys. So a lot of change there. Also, just retirement is clearly on the table of his mind. If you're willing to say, I for sure won't be here in 2020, or not for sure, I will more than likely not be here in 2027. And the way he said it, it just made it sound, I would be stunned if he's here in 2027 based on saying that. I could absolutely be wrong on all of this, right? And Utah, he could definitely coach in 2025. I would be very surprised if he coached in 26. And as I said, I think there's no way, based on the comments that he's making, that he's there in 27. Just reading what he said and reading the tea leaves, as we said. Like, if you're willing to say I for sure won't be here in 2027, that means you're clearly thinking about retirement right now. So it feels like a natural exit point to me. We know how highly he thinks of Cam too. So I just think, does he want to coach next year without Cam Rising? I think that's a legit question. Yes, he obviously did last year, but this is the year where you get Cam back. You had so many pieces and players coming back. You're helping Utah transition to the Big 12. It made a lot of sense to stay on for one more year. Would you want to? There's a reason Utah earns all the accolades, right? Preseason rankings, all the lofty expectations. Like, this is going to be a really good team from a competitive standpoint. I just think he wanted to be a part of that. And after this year, especially if they win the Big 12, get to the college football playoff, I mean, what is there left to accomplish? Like, sure, yes, you can. Maybe if they were if they didn't win a game in the college football playoff, it's like, oh, I want to get back there and win a game. Sure. But you've already guided this Utah football program to unprecedented heights, 3 conference championships in the last 4 years. I just feel like would be the cherry on top to one of the best recent college coaching careers. And I believe it makes a lot of sense for all of these reasons laid out. Like I said, the timing of it from terms of who's leaving, his own statements of not wanting to coach past 65. He's helped Utah get into the Big 12 now, all the changes in the roster. Does he want to be a part of that? I think that's a legit thing. So when you look at all of these pieces that are starting to get put together, in my opinion, this will be Kyle Whittingham's last year at the helm for Utah football. But let me know what you guys think below. Do you think this is going to be Kyle Whittingham's last year? Curious your thoughts, and what were your big takeaways from Big 12 Media Day? Because I also want to share the rest of this stuff. Kyle Whittingham will talk about his retirement more in the future, but the present is Utah's opportunity in the Big 12 in 2024 that we're also fired up about. And that's what I want to dive into in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes, our great friends at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down and we get fewer and fewer games, the sports, they're just not sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So you can head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All-Star break gearing up now, but how's it going to play out after the All-Star break? Which teams are going to make a run? Which teams will fall back? If you guys are looking to get in on the MLB betting action, you have to head over to FanDuel Sportsbook today. Utah doesn't have baseball yet, but they very well could in the near future. So look at all the odds and lines of the current MLB slate and make sure you guys head over to check it all out on FanDuel today. All righty. Let's talk about some of the other biggest takeaways I had from Big 12 Media Day. And I really want to focus on, for the rest of this, just the general statements that he made that I found interesting, not talking about my theory that this will be Kyle Whittingham's last year at the helm for Utah football. So let's talk about some of the comments and things he made. First of all, I love just the very start of his press conference. And I do want to focus heavily on the press conference. I will also mention the ESPN Plus interview a couple times, but mainly I thought the press conference is where we got a lot of the interesting information because they were the first ones to get Coach Whittingham. So by the time the Big 12 news team got him, a lot of things had already been asked. I love that Kyle Whittingham started. They played the fight song as he stepped on the stage and he was doing his little conducting thing. I thought that was a great little touch of the personality that we've kind of seen Coach Whitt have over these last few years. So I loved that early. Love the way he talked about Morgan Scalley, just praised him as a phenomenal coach. Just talked about how invested he is in the program and they invest as much as anyone's been. Talked about, of course, since his playing days and just rolling right up to Ute after that, right? He talked about how Morgan will put his stamp on it, but keep the culture in place. And he says that more coaches on his current staff will be head coaches. I absolutely agree. I look at a Sharif Shaw. I think a Jim Harding is someone. All of those guys I could see being strong culture builders and setters at other programs in the future. I hope that they stay at Utah and have success there. But if Sharif Shaw is a head coaching opportunity, I hope Sharif Shaw is at Utah a little bit longer as their DC. I eventually hope for him and Jim Harding that both of those guys and everyone on this staff that wants to be a head coach, I hope they get that opportunity. As much as I hope they stay with Utah for a while too, I'll be super happy for them for everything they've given once they get that opportunity to go on. And we talked about earlier what he kind of said too, because when he asked about his future, Coach Whitt said it's a day-by-day process. So he's not getting any younger, but has a lot of energy right now because he did say, look, this new transition to the Big 12, the opportunity there. That's why I think he said he's as excited as he's ever been for a season because of the new conferences and the challenge that's going to present itself, right? So we got an answer there. He also just talked about his excitement for the Big 12, which is something that I feel like has been lost a little bit, right? Like, yes, I've gone on shows too and said I don't think Utah is going to be a Big 12 lifer. And then what drives me absolutely nuts is Utah doesn't want to be in the Big 12 and all this and all that. I'm super happy to be in the Big 12. The Big 12 was there for Utah when the Pac-12 crumbled. And I think it's a very beneficial relationship where Utah can win on the big stage and elevate the Big 12's brand. And the Big 12 gave Utah its new conference and home. But I just think it's crazy to come out in general and say like, hey, you just left a conference. Are you going to be in the Big 12 forever? No, this is conference realignments are a real thing. So we're very excited. I think a lot of Utah fans share the sentiment. We're very excited to be in the Big 12. But we just left a conference. I'm not going to come into the new one and go right away, oh, hey, we're going to stay in this new conference forever. Like, there's no way we're ever going to leave. That's where I feel like just keeping it real. And I know some people in the media have spoken about how the Utah fans online drive them nuts for what they're saying about Utah's going to come in and run the Big 12 right away. Well, the media picked Utah to also be number one, and there's a lot of reason to be confident in this Utah roster. So I do think it's funny when people get frustrated at the fans for being confident in their roster. Yes, I'm not saying that everyone goes about it the right way, but to act like this Utah team doesn't have a chance to win the Big 12 is, I just think it's crazy when you look at the talent that is on their current roster. So that got off on a tangent there, but let's get back to media days. He talked about Cam and Brant being healthy, which is something we expected and love to hear about that. He didn't speak too much on the future of college football, which is something I thought Kyle Whittingham would definitely do and cause a stir, saying like, who knows about the Big 12 and conference realignment and all that. I don't know if he was specifically asked about anyone there off the top of my head, but that didn't come up. It's something I definitely thought would come up more. One thing I was excited to hear about from Kyle Whittingham is like, who else is going to step up, right? Like, who are some of the other guys? And he did give insight on a lot of different positions, talked about the O-line being solid. He actually he really talked about the O-line a few other times. He talked about how he feels like that the offensive line should be as good as it's ever been, which is a very bold statement for how that group performed last year. And, he talked about how Spencer Fano got that experience at left tackle. He'll slide over to the right side. And he said Caleb Lomu being at left tackle now. Remember last year we had this offensive line in flux and we didn't know who was going to be where exactly still. And there was a lot in the air. So I think that is a huge boost of confidence in not Fano at right tackle as much. Like, we know that Utah believes in Fano. He's a starter last year. We expect him to be a starter this year. The fact that Caleb Lomu is already the guy at left tackle is a big. That's big. I just think that already this early Kyle Whittingham is saying that. Of course, things can change, but seems like Lomu's locked in there and obviously has a lot of confidence in Johnny Meda coming back as the center guy, being a leader, getting the opportunity. Hopefully, no more injuries for him. Looking at other veterans, the Jaron Kumps, the Tongai who have experience, Michael Mokafisi being a multi-year starter. So I thought it was really interesting that he just said the offensive line should be as good as it's ever been. And he said the exact same thing about the tight end room. He said it's as deep and as long as he's been here, which when you had Brant Kuithe and Dalton Kincaid in the same room, not to mention Cole Fotheringham, I think I would still lean to that tight end room. But I will say this, like the trio of Brant Kuithe, Landon King, and Carson Ryan is incredible. I mean, Kuithe is still the one of the tight ends, right? He's one of the best tight ends in the country. Landon King and Carson Ryan could go to several other schools and be their top tight end and put up monster numbers. They're the second and third tight ends that Utah's had too. So I don't know if those three will be able to do what Brant and Dalton did together, but I do think that this tight end room is going to be incredible this year. I think that you have all of these guys who present a mismatch and just what they do getting open. So I do agree with a lot of what he said about the tight ends. I'm not going to say they're better than Brant, Dalton. And also I keep mentioning Cole because Cole was such a great blocking tight end. Mickey Sugaturaga, more the blocking tight end for this Utah team. Maybe that'll be Carson Ryan in part this year. And Brant, maybe that, but Brant, he still looks a little to be the blocking tight end. I still feel like he's more of that, that H-back type hybrid guy in terms of a run blocker at times for this Utah team, because he doesn't have the prototypical tight end size per se, even though he is a tenacious and willing blocker for this team. I just feel like Fotheringham was better than Sugaturaga right now. And that's why I still might give that 2021 tight end room the edge over this one. But man, this one from a pass catching standpoint, I think they will have a chance to be better, as good as Dalton and Brant were that year. So excited to see that, because I do think Brant is, if he's healthy, could be even better than he was that year. If we get the Brant Kuithe back from that 2022 game, I mean, look, from the Florida game, I mean, look out, Big 12. So that was something else I thought was notable. He was extremely confident in the D-line. Brock Osweiler asked him about, who steps up without Jonah, but he believes he said, might be their deepest position, where they have 5 or 6 guys that can really get after the quarterback. And, he mentioned Connor O'Toole being the all conference caliber player. He said last year, Whitt himself said he thought Connor was going to be their best pass rusher, ended up being Jonah. This year should be Connor. And then he mentioned guys like Logan, Fano, of course, Van Fillinger, who we should expect to be that's the top 3. But how about Patrick Fitzgerald, just transferred in from Utah State, already getting a mention? He mentioned other transfers too, that John Henry Daly to me from BYU. And that's not even mentioning a couple of the other guys that have kind of been waiting in the wings. So I've said before, I think this Utah defensive line, because the D tackle spot, I think, is incredibly deep for Utah too. I think D tackle is personally their deepest position. D ends up there, but I like I said, I would go D tackle is maybe the deepest. Tight end is right in the mix. Those 3, probably the deepest position on Utah's roster in my view of things. So this is why Utah's favored to win the Big 12, right? Though, is they have so many of these guys who are the best in the conference at their position and have multiple guys amongst the best depth in the conference. So love that Coach Whittingham spoke about that. And it was a reminder of just how good and strong this Utah roster is. So still so much more to talk about from just Kyle Whittingham's portion of Big 12 Media Day. But before we get out of here today, I want to talk about the other reason that Utah is, of course, predicted to win the Big 12. The other reason, even I mentioned earlier, that I believe after this season, we are going to see Kyle Whittingham retire is because Cam Rising will be moving on and going off to the NFL. And Cam Rising has been a transformative force for this Utah football program, guiding them to Pac-12 championships in 21 and 22. And now he's coming back this year, and you could just even tell the way Coach Whittingham speaks about him, calls him one of the best leaders he's ever been around before, the alpha of alphas, the command and the respect in the huddle, already talking about how the passing offense is going to take a step in the right direction, just simply because he's back there. You could tell that Utah is just incredibly fired up to have Cam Rising back. And Cam's, of course, excited to be back too. He was interviewed on the ESPN Plus Big 12 media show. And a couple of things he was asked about is just like last year. And this is something he talked about in media days as well too, but it just showed him a new style of leadership, right? In spring ball, he spoke about the coaching perspective, but also just talking about the power he just kind of saw of leading by example and just connecting with teammates in a different way while he couldn't be out there. He also was asked about what it will take for Utah to win the Big 12. And, he just said learning all the new faces and learn the new schemes and take it 1 week at a time, which is so important. I think I've shared this on this podcast before, but back when I played high school football, my head coach, shout out Marty Secord at Wakeland, always used to talk about, we're going to go 1-0 this week. He always used to focus on that. And, being the junior I was my first year on varsity, I always thought, I was like, why don't we just in my head, I was always just like, why don't we just say our record? I found that statement strange, but then I realized, as I grew older, I kind of realized what he meant by that. You focus the importance on this opponent this week. Everything goes into 1-0 this week, because by giving your full attention to that opponent that week and doing that each individual week, pouring everything you got into each week, that's how you eventually can accomplish your bigger goals of being a conference champion. You don't get to do that when you overlook opponents and look at multiple weeks or look ahead. Instead, 1-0 this week, focusing on this opponent this week. So I think that's what the Cam Rising is alluding to as well there. He was asked about any new additions that stand out, and right away he said Dorian Singer. He talked about that catch radius, and we've talked about it before, but I think we're going to see the Singer from Arizona, not the one at USC. There were a lot of things that didn't go right at USC last year, and I think that things are going to go much better for Singer and the Utah wide receivers, having Cam and Dorian Singer both. Their connection, I expect to be an incredibly potent one this fall. As will Brant Kuithe, of course, because that was another thing he was asked about, just the chemistry with Brant. I mean, they've been together for so long now. He said that's one of his best friends on the team. And I just think that trio, by the way, through the air, Cam Rising, Brant Kuithe, Dorian Singer, I think those will be the three faces of the Utah offense. And I think all of them are going to have monster seasons. I think Cam will be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I think Brant's going to be the best tight end in college football. And I think Dorian Singer will be a top 15 to top 10 wide receiver in the country. Or maybe we'll go top 20. I'll back up a little bit because I've still got to see how explosive Utah is going to be. So a top 20 to top 15 receiver in the country with a chance to get in the top 10. I'll leave that little wrinkle in there too. But it was great to hear from Cam Rising. It was great to hear from Kyle Whittingham. Kyle Whittingham talked about so much that we only have so much time and that we can get to in this daily podcast. So that's why I'm excited to have the opportunity, since this is a daily show, to be back with more tomorrow. On tomorrow's Locked On Utes, we'll be talking about the rest of Kyle Whittingham's comments. We can talk a little bit about what Brett Yormark said on expansion, as well as all the other latest news that will come out from day 2 of Big 12 Media Days. Some of the other coaches talked about their respective Utah. We'll react to their comments and close out everything that Kyle Whittingham said. Still so much more to come on this week's Locked On Utes. Let me know if you guys have any questions you want to hear me talk about on the show. I always appreciate all of you who especially listen to the very end of this. That's going to do it for our show today, but we'll be back with you tomorrow for more Utah football Big 12 Media Day content.